Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another installment of GNN, where we bring you the bestest news. This is just in, war rages across the globe as people claim that talking about their feelings is, quote, mid-AF. People apparently find murder an all-around better way to get their point across. We should know, we have already lost 3 reporters at GNN in the active war zone known as Detroit. This reporter asks, why? Why murder real-life people in real-life modern locations over real-life petty squabbles when you can play a simulated version of war, killing simulated people in a simulated conflict based on the Great War over 100 years ago, based on equally petty squabbles? Battlefield 1, a game released by EA in 2016 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Set during the First World War, this game broke all the norms within the first-person shooter genre of never really venturing to periods prior to World War II, as well as avoiding the futuristic setting craze the genre found itself in during the mid-2010s. Now, Battlefield is a franchise that's never exactly been the most popular FPS franchise to ever release, usually being outcompeted by Call of Duty every single year. However, Battlefield 1 was the one FPS game that could, and it became so immensely popular that it actually gave Call of Duty a run for its money and got many people into the franchise, such as myself. The game also inspired many to begin researching more about history, and specifically its setting of World War I, which would result in A, people actually knowing that Austria-Hungary was a thing, and B, World War I gaining much more intrigue, at least online, than it had prior to the game's release. And, similar to everyone else, I was also inspired to begin researching more about history and eventually become whatever the stage past history buff is. Well, actually it was Assassin's Creed that started that, but Battlefield 1 was the jumping off point. And now, just because I spent summer 2017 absolutely obsessed with the game, I am now going to college as a history major. Neat. Anyway, what was it besides the setting of the game that hooked me? Well, I'm gonna be fully honest here. The campaign was not what grabbed me, but it's still incredible. Rather than going for the one large story type of campaign that shooters like Call of Duty go for, Battlefield 1 instead uses what they call the, quote, war stories, which are smaller self-contained stories. Consisting of 5 missions, players are able to experience things from all fronts of the war, such as the tank battle of Cambrai, a Zeppelin raid on London, combat in the Alps, the Allied landings at Gallipoli, the Arab revolt orchestrated by Lawrence of Arabia, as well as the prologue, which I have not mentioned yet, but it is by far the best of them. Following the Harlem Hellfighters, you are told at the beginning of it that you are not expected to survive, and they are not kidding around because each time you die, the person you are playing as stays dead and you move on to another soldier. Even though this is rather depressing, it is just a masterful way to show the brutality of World War I, and I have to say, in all of the shooters I've ever played, this has got to be my favorite campaign mission. Anyway, let's transition over to the multiplayer, shall we? Now, due to the setting of Battlefield 1 being, well, World War I, several elements were added to the game to make it feel more like the Great War. For instance, instead of playing as the generic good guy and bad guy teams like most shooters do, the developers went out of their way to represent the numerous nations which participated in the war. On one side, we have the Allies, or Entente if you're feeling fancy, which consists of Britain, America, and Italy, as well as France, Russia, and the British Royal Marines through the DLC. And on the other side, we have the Central Powers, which consist of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, I don't blame you if you don't know what Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire were, because I'm pretty sure nobody did prior to this game's release. Another way the developers made sure you remembered the game took place in World War I is the overabundance of chemical weapons, which certainly helped set the mood. Now you might be wondering why chemical weapons would be used in warfare. I thought that was a war crime, you might be screaming. Well, that's a funny word for a suggestion. Moving on to more steps to help immersion, we have a staple of the Battlefield franchise, being the classes. Now, since the franchise's inception, Battlefield has been known for allowing players to use different classes in order to help their team out in different circumstances, and Battlefield 1 is no exception to that. In this game, you have 4 main classes, consisting of Assault, which has access to submachine guns, shotguns, as well as anti-tank weapons, Medic, which has access to semi-automatic rifles, a Syringe, which has the ability to revive players, as well as healing supplies, Support, which has access to machine guns, miscellaneous explosives, as well as ammo, and Scout, which has access to snipers and all kinds of gadgets to help you spot enemies. There are also 3 vehicle classes, being Tanker and Pilot, I wonder what they get, as well as Cavalry. Let me repeat that. You can ride a horse while attacking tanks in this game. God, I love how weird World War I was. However, unlike the other games in the franchise, Battlefield 1 introduces a new type of class, the Elite classes, consisting of the Sentry, which gets armor as well as a big ol' machine gun, the Tank Hunter, which does exactly what it sounds like, the Flame Trooper, which, again, does what it sounds like, the Trench Raider, which gets a spiked club that can one-shot enemies, and the Infiltrator, which gets a grenade launcher, a spawn beacon, and can call in artillery. These 5 admittedly pretty overpowered classes are balanced out by the fact that they randomly spawn in during a match and only a handful can be found on one map. Another unique feature which Battlefield 1 boasts is the Behemoth system, which allows the losing team to get a giant vehicle as reinforcements to help them turn the tide of the match. There are 4 of these Behemoths, including the Armored Train, Dreadnought, Zeppelin, and the Char 2C tank. These overpowered vehicles are all cool in their own right, but quite possibly the coolest of the pack is the Zeppelin, due to the fact that when it gets destroyed, it creates such a cool spectacle and actually crashes onto the map and stays there for the rest of the round. Although all this stuff is great and all, you kinda need some game modes to use them in, and thankfully Battlefield 1 has plenty for us to mess around in. Though, due to this game's age, many of these game modes have long since been abandoned, so we'll just skip over those in order to discuss, Conquest, the game mode most synonymous with the Battlefield franchise. In this game mode, both teams fight for control over all the objectives placed around the map in order to gain points. First team to 1,000 points is declared the winner. Another game mode which isn't necessarily synonymous with the Battlefield franchise, but rather to online shooters as a whole, is Team Deathmatch. And given how synonymous this game mode is to the online shooter genre, I think I can just gloss over this one. That's right, I'm being lazy. Sue me. Although 2 of the major game modes present within this game are some of the most widespread game mode concepts in the FPS genre, Battlefield 1 introduced a unique game mode, which I might go as far as to say is my favorite game mode in any online game I've ever played. Operations. Now, Operations is a bit of a unique take on the Conquest game mode, mixed with another game mode I didn't discuss because I can't find any servers running it, which is called Domination. In Operations, one team is tasked with defending a set number of objectives while the other team is tasked with attacking them. If the attacking team takes all the objectives, then they will advance into the next sector, though if they fail to take a sector by running out of respawns, they have 2 more tries to do so while being reinforced with a behemoth. And although all that sounds really cool, the real fun comes in when the attackers conquer all sectors, because once that occurs, both teams will move on to another map to continue the fight. This mode is just so cool, and I love the fact that it actually takes inspiration from real-life campaigns in order to show players how the war was waged across a large area. I also love the fact that it allows us to play on numerous maps. And that transitions us perfectly into discussing the maps the game has to offer. So, we will be going over all the maps in the game, discuss their historical inspiration, as well as how they play. And, to begin, we have Amiens, which is set during the 1918 battle for the French city of the same name. Set in the middle of the city, the map is primarily focused on infantry combat, which is great. However, it can get a little annoying when you have players sitting in corners with shotguns or SMGs, but whatever. My only other complaint is that both teams usually only ever fight over the objectives located in the middle of the map, due to there not being a whole lot of opportunities to flank the other team. However, urban combat is fun, so I'll let that slide. Next up is the first of only 2 maps featuring the United States. Argonne Forest takes place during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive of late 1918, and similar to Amiens, this is an infantry-focused map, with troops battling throughout the trenches and bunkers of the forest, so be ready to deal with way too much gas. Also, side note, if you look this up on Google Maps, a picture of Battlefield 1 comes up, which is just hilarious. Moving on, we have Ballroom Blitz, not to be confused with the song. This is the second American map, which also takes place during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Taking place in the French countryside, the map is focused around a central chateau, which allows for a great mix of both vehicle and infantry gameplay. As long as you don't fall into the back rooms. Following up Ballroom Blitz is Empire's Edge, and I have mixed feelings on this map. Set during the final days of the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, we see the Italian army facing the Austro-Hungarians for control over the Western Alps. Fun fact, it was actually this battle which was one of the immediate causes of the collapse of Austria-Hungary. Anyway, this map is fun in the middle of it, however, it is a tad sniper heavy upon leaving it. Also, I find it rather odd that the entire coastal region of this map exists. Yes, it does provide for interesting flanking routes, but it's just such a small sliver that it doesn't really do a whole lot. Beyond that, it's rather fun with some pretty good opportunities for long shots. Next up is Fao Fortress, which is set during the British invasion of Ottoman Mesopotamia. Focusing around this massive fortress which the map takes its name from, it is really the best part of the map. Once outside the fortress, the map just kind of becomes dull, which seems to be a common theme with the desert maps of Battlefield 1. Another map which kind of falls into the dull category is Giant's Shadow. Set during the 1918 Battle of Celle, this map is kind of forgettable. Not necessarily because of the setting itself, because the massive crashed airship in the middle of the map is both really cool and really fun, but similar to the Fao Fortress, once you leave the main focal point of the map, it just kind of becomes forgettable. The forgettable nature of this map can also be attributed to it being kind of oddly added in through a free patch after the game's release, which just makes its inclusion feel rather odd. A map that isn't forgettable, though, is Monte Grappa, which, similar to Empire's Edge, also takes place during the Battle of Vittorio Veneto, just at the beginning of it rather than the end. The map is split into two areas, the main road and the mountain bunkers, and although the main road is fine and you can occasionally spot the elusive sliding man of the Alps, the main draw of the map is the mountain bunkers. Why, might you ask? Well, it is incredibly fun to try and either defend the bunkers or dislodge defenders. And, well, big cannon. Need I say more? Next up is probably what I would say the weakest base game map of Battlefield 1 is, that being Sinai Desert. Now, why do I say that? This thing is way too big. Now, I understand why they did this, as it is set in the vast deserts of the Sinai Peninsula during the British 1916 Sinai and Palestine campaign, but oh my lord, this map is way too big for its own good. Like, why are all the objectives bunched together at the top, and then there's just this weird one down the middle of nowhere? I mean, the map is fun when you get into the town area, because you kind of forget about the size of the map, but once you get outside of it, you're just stuck running until you get sniped by someone on the other side of the map because cover is just non-existent aside from the sand dunes. Anyway, moving on from the weakest to probably the most basic map in the game, we have St. Quentin Scar, taking place in 1918 during the Battle of St. Quentin Canal, which was, fun fact, actually the battle which ultimately broke the Hindenburg Line and convinced the Germans to surrender. Although having a really cool influence, the map is just fine. It's probably because I've played this map way too many times, but everything on the map is just generally okay. It honestly kind of feels like this was the first map made for the game because it has all the elements which make up the best maps in the game, but none of them feel fully realized. Best thing I can say about this map is that it's good, just not anything special. And now we have arrived at the last base game map of Battlefield 1, that being Suez. Set during the Ottoman raid on the Suez Canal in 1915, this is actually the best of the desert maps in Battlefield 1. And thankfully, instead of being big like Sinai Desert, Suez is long, which really works in the map's favor. With the objectives being situated in a line, you can easily tell where the front line is, and you can easily flank the enemy and surround them. Only issue I have is one that I have with all the desert maps in this game, which is the lack of any significant cover outside of the built-up areas. However, it isn't nearly as bad on Suez as it is on Sinai Desert or Foul Fortress. Overall, this map is actually pretty good, and if you get the right team, it can be some of the most fun you have on Battlefield 1. Although the 10 base game maps were overall pretty good, it just wasn't enough for many, which transitions us perfectly into the game's DLC. 4 DLCs released over the course of this game's life cycle called They Shall Not Pass, In the Name of the Tsar, Turning Tides, and Apocalypse, or as I call them, French, Russian, Naval, and whatever else they didn't get to put in. With these 4 DLCs, a handful of weapons and factions were added in, but all we really care about is the 21 new maps added to the game. So let's get right back into looking at maps. And getting back into it, we have Fort de Vaux, which takes place during the French defense of the fort of the same name in 1916. Being set within the fort itself, this map quickly found itself as the meat grinder of Battlefield 1 maps, as the infantry-only nature of the map, paired with the tight corridors and maze-like layout, lend themselves very well towards high-kill rounds. Next up is Nivelle Nights, which likely takes place during the Second Battle of the Aisne. This map is dark. Not necessarily in the graphic and violent nature of warfare, because you could say that about all the maps in this game, but it actually takes place at night. Now, it isn't too bad once you get used to it, but it is a bit of an adjustment. Thankfully, the map is pretty open, so the moon lights up the environment pretty well, alongside much of the map being within trenches, which are lit up pretty well. And putting lighting aside, it plays fun, so hey, it's got that going for it. Though, a map which does suffer from poor lighting is... oh god, how do I pronounce that? Anyway, the map takes place in 1917 as a bit of an amalgamation of numerous battles, including the previously mentioned Second Battle of the Aisne and the Third Battle of Champagne. Now, the map plays similar to Amiens, with its similar urban architecture. However, the thing that makes it significantly worse than Amiens is the lighting. Unlike Nivelle Nights, where the night setting wasn't much of an issue, it really is with this map. You can barely see where your teammates are, much less your enemies, and it is genuinely aggravating when you get killed by someone you couldn't see just because the lighting on this map is so minimal. Getting back into the light, we have Rupture, which takes place during the 1918 Second Battle of the Marne, and I have to take a minute to recognize just how great this map looks with all the poppies growing around it. Okay, now that we've enjoyed nature for a minute, let's get back to war. The map is centered around this bridge, which is incredibly entertaining to try and either defend or attack, because you can get up inside the bridge and get a great vantage point. Oh, also this map is a Dark Souls Easter egg, which is pretty neat. Soissons is next, which also takes place during the Second Battle of the Marne. The map is focused around the village of, Soissons, which is situated inside a valley, which is pretty cool. However, it makes it a bit of a pain when it comes to snipers. However, the part of the map which plays the best, in my opinion, is the chateau situated on the eastern part of the map. I don't know what it is about it, but I just really like it. Next up is Verdun Heights, which takes place during the longest battle of the war, the infamous 1916 Battle of Verdun. And if I were ranking these maps based solely on atmosphere, I think I'd have to give first place to this map right here. The fact that you start out in a relatively untouched village, move into the ruins of an old church, and eventually wind up on the flaming hills defending half-destroyed fortifications just really gives you that hellish vibe that battle's known for in real life. The map also plays well and stuff, but good lord, that atmosphere is top-notch, and a great spot to end off the French DLC. And transitioning into the In the Name of the Tsar DLC, we have Albion, which takes its name from the 1917 operation of the same name, which saw Germany invade the West Estonian archipelago in order to threaten St. Petersburg. Or I guess it was Petrograd at the time, wasn't it? This map is unique when comparing it to the others that we've already discussed, as it is the first map to really make naval combat an integral part of the map. And although that is really neat, it doesn't really matter as most of the action takes place on the largest of the islands. The only other comment I have to make about this map is it tends to lean pretty heavily into the sniper frenzy angle, which I usually hate, but I mean, come on. That was a pretty nice shot. Moving on to the next map, which takes place during the brutal 1916 Brusilov offensive, Brusilov Keep sees Russian and Austro-Hungarian forces duking it out in the Carpathian Mountains. And to be honest, this map is fine. But let me tell you, this map is incredibly unbalanced. Every match I can recall playing on this map was either a blowout victory or an utter catastrophe, no in-between. Well, unless you count this as the in-between. Anyway, so you know how I've given nearly universal praise to all the maps within this game with only fairly minor complaints? Yeah, we're changing that up with Galicia. Similar to Brusilov Keep, this map is set during the Brusilov Offensive of 1916. This map just sucks. Correction, if you aren't an Austro-Hungarian or sitting in the back of the map with a sniper, this map sucks. Taking place in a frozen over field, there is just no covering. God forbid you're on the Russian team because your spawn is surrounded by nothing but open fields. On the other side of things, the Austro-Hungarian team's spawn is surrounded by trenches which lead directly to the middle of the map. This leads to most rounds resulting in the Russian team getting spawn trapped and utterly eviscerated. I say most rounds, as the round you're looking at actually wasn't nearly as bad as the typical one is, so if I haven't made it clear enough, I wholeheartedly believe Galicia is by far the worst map in Battlefield 1. Though a map that isn't complete and utter garbage is Lupkow Pass, which takes place deep in the Carpathian Mountains during the 1915 battle of the same name. Overall, this is a fine map with some very cool parts. My only complaint is some of the objectives are placed pretty far away from each other in kind of weird spots, like this one, which is just off on its own, not close to anyone. But it's not Galicia, so I mean, hey, it's actually pretty good. Tsaritsyn is next, and unlike all the previous maps discussed, this one actually does not take place during World War I. I know, false advertising at its finest. No, instead, this map takes place during the 1919 Russian Civil War. Now, if we actually look at the map, we discover that it is essentially Amiens, but smaller, better, and more Russian. Also, this map just looks stunning. Can we just take a minute to appreciate that a game that released in 2016 can look better than some games released today? Anyway, my only real complaint is that matches can often just become one team cornering the other team on just one objective since there are only 3. Beyond that, though, it just really is a blast to play. And now for the final map within the Russian DLC, we have Volga River. Like Tsaritsyn, Volga River is set during the 1919 Russian Civil War. However, unlike Tsaritsyn, this map was actually the hardest to find running on a server in Battlefield 1. And due to this struggle, I was hoping that I would have been blown away by how great it was. But, in reality, it was just alright. It doesn't exactly do anything great, but I mean, it doesn't exactly do anything terrible, so I mean, that's good. I think. And moving into the Turning Tides DLC, we have Achibaba. Similar to the map's fun name, the map itself is a pretty fun infantry-focused map. Set during the 1915 Battle of Krithia, which saw the British and Ottoman forces duking it out in the ruins over a small village during the Gallipoli campaign. All in all, this is a very fun infantry-only map, and easily one of the best in the game. Though, it can get a tad hectic, which, depending on the round, can either be a positive or negative. Next up is the World War I D-Day map, Cape Helles. Like Achibaba, the map takes place during the Gallipoli campaign in 1915, and we get to see the British and Ottoman forces fighting for control over the opening to the Dardanelles Strait. The best part of this map is the fact that due to the enemies controlling all objectives when the round begins, it really feels like you're participating in an invasion, which just feels great to play. Our next map is Heligoland Bight, which is the first of 2 predominantly naval-oriented maps featured within Battlefield 1. Taking place during the first real naval battle of the war in mid-1914, it pits the British Royal Marines and the Germans against each other. Despite being primarily naval-oriented, the map is focused around one center island which contains most of the objectives, except for two of them which are located on this smaller southern island, which I much prefer as it's less congested and a perfect location to spot the elusive flying boat of the North Sea. Next up is Zeebrugge, which, as the name implies, is based on the 1918 Zeebrugge raid, which saw the British Navy assault a German U-boat port. This map is one of the most linear maps in the game, which sounds pretty bad, but it provides for a rather entertaining tug-of-war type of match. But if you want to try and take out the opposing team, you can take the boat around the edges of the map in order to try and flank them. You can also capture some objectives while on a boat, which provides for a nice blend of naval and infantry combat, which I feel is a perfect way to send off the Turning Tides DLC. And now, moving into the Apocalypse DLC, we have Caporetto, which is set during the 1917 battle of the same name. However, it is also called the 12th Battle of the Isonzo. So you can just tell the war was not going well for the Italians. The map takes place between the previously mentioned Isonzo River and the snow-covered mountains. This creates a great little valley where all the objectives are situated, which just naturally causes the teams to duke it out in the middle. Though, say it with me now, the snipers are pretty annoying. Anyway, you remember how when we were discussing Verdun Heights, I said that had the best atmosphere in Battlefield 1? Well, Passchendaele here might give it a run for its money. Set during the 1917 battle of the same name, or also known as the Third Battle of Ypres to some, or known to me as one of the times Canada gave up on being nice, the map really has this just hellish and terrifying look to it that really encapsulates how brutal the Western Front of the war was, especially with the green haze of mustard gas in the background. Oh, the map also plays well and stuff, but I mean, like, just, man, that atmosphere is just something else. And our final map is River Somme, and it seems rather fitting to end off the maps of Battlefield 1 with one which takes place during one of the most infamous battles of the war. Set during the bloody 1916 Battle of the Somme, which also contains the bloodiest day in British history, this map is pretty good. Despite being rather flat, it isn't as much of an issue as it is on other maps, as this one contains a vast trench network which funnels both teams towards each other. My only complaint is that sometimes as the British, it can be a little difficult to cross into the portion of the map with the trenches, but beyond that, it's a really fun map and a perfect place to end our map discussions. Psych, you thought we were done, and well, we mostly are, but if you've been keeping score at home, I only discussed 19 DLC maps, and I told you there were 21. So what happened to the remaining 2? Well, they're exclusive to the new game mode introduced with the Apocalypse DLC titled Air Assault. The 2 exclusive maps are London Calling and Razor's Edge. Both maps are very obviously just taken from the war story named Friends in High Places, and as a person who played like 2 rounds of Air Assault back in 2018 and just hasn't played it since because, well, frankly put, there hasn't been an active server running this mode in years, I'll say the maps are fine and we'll just move on. So after playing a whole lot of multiplayer in order to play on all the maps, I have come to the conclusion that I will continue to state that Battlefield 1 is my favorite multiplayer game of all time. The unique and very detailed time period mixed with wonderful gameplay and teamwork makes Battlefield 1 just a delightful time. The game also has just all around wonderful maps, with one major exception. Yes, I'm talking to you, Glacia. You are an awful map, and I will make sure to remind you that till the day we both die. And I'm not the only person that thinks this game is one of the greatest multiplayer experiences of all time, as Battlefield 1 quite possibly has one of the largest followings for a primarily online game which has long since passed its prime. With around 21 million copies sold, Battlefield 1 stands as a testament that unique games which break norms can succeed and go on to become a major success. It was such a success that Battlefield 1 became the second best-selling game of 2016, only barely being beaten by Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. However, despite this success, the Battlefield series has been in an odd spot ever since its release, as all subsequent releases have been marred by plenty of controversy, some justified and some less so. This has made Battlefield 1 the game which Battlefield fans tend to return to time and time again, as it remains a high point of the series. And what a high point it truly was. This reporter once again asks, why? Why go to real-life modern war when you can play a simulated version of what war was like at the turn of the century? I rest my case, and thank you. Next up, GNM interviews the Battlefield community. With how good Battlefield 1 was, it can be inferred that the Battlefield community is in the best spot it has ever been, even after nearly a decade since the game's release. Over to you, Timothy.
Oh God, I'm too beautiful to die!
I really gotta stop sending reporters to active war zones.